Welcome to this episode of What's Going On with Shipping. I'm your host, Sal Mercogliano. We have an interview today with probably the most significant figure we've ever interviewed here at What's Going On with Shipping in our 4-year history, in a segment we like to call Between Two Sterns. And sitting between our two sterns today is going to be Senator Mark Kelly. Senator Mark Kelly, along with Senator Todd Young, reintroduced into Congress the SHIPS Act. Now, we've talked about the SHIPS Act in the past. However, it didn't get out of Congress last time, and so it's been reintroduced, SHIPS Act 2.0. We're going to go over the 12 major provisions of the SHIPS Act. Then we're going to do a 15-minute interview with Senator Kelly. And then at the end of this video, I'll have attached a segment that Senator Kelly and Senator Young did over at the Hudson Institute. They were interviewed, about a 30-minute discussion in detail about the SHIPS Act. If you're new to the channel, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come out. So first, the SHIPS Act will have an oversight and national coordination element, including establishing a maritime security advisor, really interested in who that's going to be, and a new maritime security board. It's also going to expand the roles of an existing advisory committee, the Maritime Transportation System National Advisory Committee, and there'll be oversight provided by both the GAO and the Federal Maritime Commission. To fund this, they're establishing a Maritime Security Trust Fund, much like the Highway Trust Fund and other transportation trust funds. This one is going to derive its money from duties, tonnage taxes, and other penalties. So, for example, the U.S. Trade Representative Section 301 port fees on Chinese-built and Chinese-owned ships, that money will be going into this Maritime Security Fund. And it's also going to prevent the suspension of tonnage taxes for foreign vessels by foreign adversaries. Section 3 and 4 deals with shipping directly, and particularly Section 3, sea lift and strategic capabilities. It's going to declare it U.S. policy to maintain a U.S. flag strategic fleet. That's going to be done in coordination with Department of Transportation to identify commercial requirements, and then Department of Defense to identify national security military requirements. It's also going to expand the National Freight Strategic Plan to include sea lift and amend laws to counter unfair foreign shipping practices. Fourth, strategic commercial fleet will be launched. This is an effort to grow the U.S. flag fleet to 250 vessels. There's roughly about 80 vessels right now involved in foreign shipping. In other words, U.S. ships involved in international trade, hauling imports and exports by the U.S. They want to increase that up to 250 ships. That can be done by reflagging vessels into the U.S. fleet. We've already heard from CMA CGM. They're going to reflag 20 more vessels into the current 10-ship fleet they have that is U.S. flagged under APL. It allows, in the interim, foreign-built vessels to phase them out over the next few years up to fiscal year 2030. It's going to prioritize a tanker procurement program because we're woefully short of tankers, especially for the Department of Defense. It's going to expand cargo preference, rule that 100% of U.S. government cargo must move on U.S. flagged vessels, including imports from China. That's going to expand to 10% within 15 years. And then it creates a Ships America office to promote U.S. shipping and consumer awareness. Section 5 deals with some regulatory issues, so they're going to streamline the Coast Guard compliance through an alternate compliance program. Coast Guard regulations are usually much more stringent than, for example, IMO, and you see that in the next one where it says it's going to form a rulemaking committee to align U.S. maritime regulations with IMO standards, and then it's going to modify the existing 1851 Limitation of Liability Act. You may remember when the Dolly hit the bridge in Baltimore, the ship claimed limitation of liability to basically defer a lot of expenses. You can't sue more than the cost of the vessel and cargo. Finally, there's going to be a lot of investment in shipbuilding, talking about authorizing $250 million annually for domestic shipbuilding projects, not for shipbuilding, but for shipbuilding projects, $100 million a year for small shipyards. It's going to convert Title XI financing into a revolving loan fund, which I think is key because it's not being authorized enough money right now. It's going to modernize the construction and capital construction funds, opening them to more maritime sector areas, including marine terminals. It's going to streamline environmental reviews and unlock DOE, Department of Energy, loan guarantees. And then it's going to target and really mandate assessments of Chinese link logistics threats like logging, which is a system that tracks cargo. So again, a lot of investment and reform in this new SHIPS Act. Section 7 looks at defense shipbuilding integration, DoD and Navy to incorporate commercial best practices. One of the problems we've had is U.S. shipyards, private shipyards, have become sole source to the U.S. Navy. There's no competition there. And so when you only have one customer, you build to meet that customer's needs. It's also going to enhance the recruitment and retention for the Military Sea Lift Command, the largest employer of merchant mariners. They employ about 5,000 mariners directly and about 1,200 through contract ships. And innovation and infrastructure is going to fund maritime innovation incubators at $50 million a year, focusing on R&D. I love to see start focusing on some of those ship propulsion issues, like small modular reactors. I think that's going to be absolutely critical for us to enhance our ability to really become a major innovator in shipping. And then it strengthens ties to the National Shipbuilding Research Program. And then workforce development. This is really a twofold issue. It deals with both ashore and afloat. It's going to make mariners and shipyard workers eligible for public service, loan forgiveness, and GI Bill benefits. I think that's really key for a merchant mariner, especially that latter. I sailed on board a hospital ship alongside my wife during the Persian Gulf War. She was eligible for GI benefits, everything. I was a merchant mariner and employee of the U.S. government, and I got nothing, squat. Which is, I'm not bitter about it, but I'm just saying if you want to really encourage people to go into an industry, especially where 1 out of every 5 U.S. Navy ships are crewed by merchant mariners, you should treat them better than second-class citizens. Goes on here, establishes new recruiting pipelines via DoD schools and transition programs. They've got to modernize how to get your merchant marine credentials. I've talked about this a lot. And then expand support for the Navy Sea Cadet Corps and the international academic exchanges in naval architecture. Sea Cadets are a fantastic system. It's kind of like the Boys and Girl Scouts for the Navy. It gets them involved. I want to see even more of that down into high school and community college levels. Let's get this promoted. I think it's a really key thing. Number 10 looks at the Merchant Marine Academies, specifically modernizing the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. It needs funding. It's in decrepit shape. It is not good. And this should be a priority. There's already bills in Congress to do this. Senator Duffy, the Secretary of Transportation, has put this as a priority. And then boost support and enrollment for the state maritime academies. 6 state maritime academies: Michigan, California, Texas, Maine, Massachusetts, and of course, how can we forget the best of them all, New York. And so including scholarships, training ship integration, naval exercises. I mean, we should do a lot to encourage the cadets and midshipmen at those schools to get their credentials, get their licenses, and more importantly, be able to keep it up, which goes into the next one here. Digitizes the merchant marine credentialing system, revises training standards, and clarifies renewal. Right now, the system is broke. I can't say it any more than that. It is the 11th of 11 missions for the U.S. Coast Guard. The merchant marine credentialing is located in the maritime state of West Virginia. I'm not kidding. It's there because of Senator Byrd putting it up there a long time ago. We need to update this immensely. And again, I don't think the Coast Guard should be certifying and giving credentials to merchant mariners. The Air Force doesn't do it for commercial pilots. The Army doesn't do it for truck drivers. I don't know why the Coast Guard still does this. It should be privatized or under the Maritime Administration. And then authorize an emergency reactivation of expired merchant marine credentials. Yes, I would love to go back out to sea for a month or two every summer on a school training ship, but for me to get my license back up and running would cost a huge amount of money and a massive amount of time to get it going. And last but not least, 12, tax incentives. Now, I should note that the SHIPS Act is a little bit different as it was implemented. All the other provisions are in one act. The tax incentives are in a separate bill. So there's actually 2 bills going up. Building Ships in the Ships in America Act. So this establishes a 33% tax credit for building U.S. flag vessels. Most tax incentives are usually about 25%, but this is a 33%. Exempts various maritime program payments from gross income. Expands access to tonnage tax regimes and capital gains employees in new maritime prosperity zones, and creates a 25% tax credit for investment in shipyards and repair facilities. I think the tax incentives need to be expanded, in my opinion. This is just my opinion on it. I think, for example, merchant mariners sailing on their licenses should be given tax exemption for their federal income tax. I think that we should be seeing more opportunity for low-interest loans from the government. Building a ship is a huge investment because you don't get that ship for 3 to 5 years. We need to do more for that. We need to be able to defer the costs on the back end. And more importantly, if you're going to invest and buy a ship, the government should be there to provide some sort of safety net to buy the ship back or take it out of your hands, put it into a layup status so it can be used again another time. But again, that's my own opinion. But this is the way the SHIPS Act is currently laid out. All right, now I want to take you over to my interview with Senator Kelly, and then afterwards we're going to hop into the interview that he and Senator Young did over at the Hudson Institute. So we're joined by Senator Mark Kelly, Democrat from the state of Arizona, former astronaut, former Navy sailor, a graduate of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. And sir, thank you for being with us on what we like to call here Between Two Sterns.
Well, Sal, thank you for having me on.
Sir, as a former sailor, I can't help but notice you were doing a lot of ship talk yesterday, and mainly because you and a slew of people were introducing the new SHIPS Act, the 2.0 version. Yourself, Senator Todd Young, Republican from Indiana, co-authoring that, bringing it up. I was wondering if you could introduce to our viewers here what exactly this new SHIPS Act entails and why is it important to everybody?
Well, Sal, let me talk about the importance part first. So you say, yeah, I am a sailor. I was a naval aviator in the United States Navy, but I also went to the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy. And between 1982 and 1986, when I was there were probably around 500 or so U.S. flagged ships in international commerce. By the time I was in the first Gulf War in 1991, that number was down to 400. And those ships actually helped us get some of that combat power over to the Middle East, which we really needed. And today we do have a military sea lift command. We did then as well, but the number of U.S. flagships continues to go down. That number in 1991 was 400. Today it's 80. China has 5,500. And I'm sure your viewers understand the problem. And that it's unsustainable, and we have to do something to fix this. So the Ships for America Act is the legislation that is needed right now to get this industry back on track. And it's not only about building merchant ships. If we fix the merchant ship problem and we build the ecosystem to make these commercial vessels, and that means fixing the capacity at U.S. shipyards and having the right workforce and then flagging the ships and having the incentives in place, then we will also be able to build more Navy ships. We need the supply chains. We need the shipyard capacity. So this is a national security issue for us and an economic security issue as well.
Yeah, when you were flying off Midway during that first Persian Gulf War, I was sailing for Military Sea Lift Command. I was on Comfort. And one of the things that got me to swallow the anchor and come ashore was to become a historian, to study how we did that huge, massive logistical movement of the 7th Corps out of Europe and support 6 carrier strike groups over there in the Persian Gulf. Something that I think you talked about the other day at Hudson, as a matter of fact, with the national and security issues. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, the national and the military security issues that we face today. I mean, we're dealing with issues for the first time of a potential peer-to-peer conflict or a peer-to-peer competitor out there. We've gotten away with kind of non-contested logistics for a long time. But more importantly, we've seen with the Section 301 report done by the U.S. trade rep starting in the Biden administration and carried over to this one, the dominance of the Chinese maritime in not just shipping, but literally across the board in vertical integration and horizontal integration.
Yeah, and on the shipping front, they have the ability to produce about 232 times the tonnage when they build ships every year. Every single year, they crank out in tonnage 232 times what the United States does. That is just almost hard to wrap your head around. They're building thousands of ships, and we're building 10 or maybe 15. And it is it's a huge problem. Now, we are really good at the contested logistics problem at the beginning of a conflict. This is my view on this. We're going to be really good in the beginning of a war, whether it's in the Western Pacific or the Middle East or in Europe, of getting the stuff we need there. We've got that figured out. The thing that I'm worried about is what happens on day 60 or a year into a conflict. And by the way, if conflicts go for a year, they usually go many years. If they're not over fast, they usually last a long time. And we've got to get stuff if the conflict's with China, we got to get across a 5,000-mile Pacific Ocean. And that's going to be really hard to do when the Chinese have a similar kind of combat capability in surface-to-surface missile systems and air-to-ground missiles, and the what's called the A2, the anti-access, anti-denial A2AD bubble that they're going to push out into the Pacific Ocean. So it's going to be a challenge for us to get this stuff over there and then sustain it over a period of time. And, as you mentioned, I come from a background that's not just the Navy. My family, by the way, my grandfather served in the Merchant Marine during World War II in the Atlantic Ocean. My other grandfather in the Navy in the Pacific. So I've got a sort of a long history with this. And this is a problem I've been looking at since the 1980s, and I've wanted to figure out a way to solve it. And we can solve it. And this legislation, which is over 300 pages long, has all the components needed to fix the shipbuilding, the flagging, and operating of U.S. vessels, and fix the workforce. And it does that by a number of different means.
Yeah, I want to ask you just to maybe explain briefly just a couple of those, because I know you're short on time, but I got to agree with you 100% as the historian here. What victory was in World War II was long before World War II started, with things like the Merchant Marine Act of 1936, and then the Two Ocean Naval Act of 1940 that got shipbuilding going back in our yards and created that infrastructure so that by 43 we saw the fruits of that really materialize on the battlefront for it. So I watched your brief little talk you did up at Philly Shipyard the other day on board one of the new state training ships, and I was wondering if you could highlight maybe something here that you think is going to be a really key asset that's going to happen, especially for the constituents in states like yours in Arizona and Indiana, which aren't on the ocean front. They're the Colorado River is a big river, but not quite ocean front. What is it for them that you're really trying to get across that's really important in this legislation?
Well, I mean, there will be places in the country that have shipyards that'll clearly benefit from the jobs perspective. But as we rebuild the ecosystem to supply parts for commercial ships and then also naval vessels, those parts can come from anywhere in the country. But it's not just about making jobs. I mean, we need to have the sea lift capacity to get things from all over the world here to the United States. If you remember what happened in 2021 and 2022, post-COVID or during COVID, where supply chains were just cut off because of COVID, we could easily see a similar scenario if China just decides that they want to put, a big amount of hurt on our economy and just shut down the transportation of goods to the United States. They could do that. They have 5,500 ships that are somewhat under their control. So that is a huge concern of mine. So economic security matters to everybody. And it should. And if we grow this industry, I think it'll help grow our entire economy and create good paying jobs.
I can't agree with you more on that. And what I really found really interesting is in that short little talk you gave, you talked about issues, for example, of how the commercial really feeds into the Navy too. If we fix this shipbuilding aspect, it actually makes the Navy much more better able to do that. You were talking about workforce initiatives too, which I think is really important as an element in there. I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that, that trying to get that workforce, because you and I were in, at a time when we had a 600 ship Navy, we were looking at, a potential Cold War. And then we went to a 300 ship Navy and sat there and said, hey, our commercial shipping can be done by these, open registries. But today we're seeing that's a bit of a problem, and it could be a problem in a scenario going forward.
Well, the workforce is certainly an issue. I was over at the Atlantic Council today. We talked about this, and if you go and did a survey of high school students and ask them what industries do you want to work in, give me a list of 10. I can't imagine you're going to find many kids that are going to say, hey, I'm interested in working in the U.S. Merchant Marine. It's not something they're aware of. So we got to get the message out that these are great paying jobs that you can have for a career, that are exciting, that are worth doing, that's service to your country. So getting the message out, and then having the training programs in place to make sure the folks have the skills to do these jobs, whether it's the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy or Piney Point, which is the unlicensed seafarers union, the school for the union, or the state maritime academies. And then also training the workforce that'll work in the shipyards, the welders, pipe fitters, electricians we need. The former president of Newport News Shipbuilding was a woman named Jennifer Boykin, who, when we were at the Merchant Marine Academy together, she was in my class. Her name was Jennifer Roman. And she was, at the highest level of leadership there at Newport News. And she used to always tell me one of the biggest challenges she faced in trying to get two, submarines out the door every year, Virginia-class subs, or get that next aircraft carrier built, was having the workforce to build the ships. Now, they train a lot of their own workers, but they also need to, and they're trying to pay them more so they can retain them. So workforce retention, there are some things in the legislation that deals with this, tax incentives, that has to do with the workforce, but also money to help these organizations train the workers we need to support this industry.
Last question, sir, and I'll let you go. Do you see this? I mean, this is the first piece of maritime reform legislation, substantial, since 1970. So we're talking 55 years since the Merchant Marine Act of 1970. You and I were wee little tots at the time running around. Do you see this as the end all of that, or maybe just the beginning, because of the awakening that a lot of people have had? That's kind of sea blindness has kind of gone away because of issues, as you mentioned, with the supply chain crisis and how dependent we really are on that international trade for both our imports, but more importantly, too, for our exports. A lot of goods have got to get out into that international marketplace.
Yeah, well, it could be just the first step, but this is a really very comprehensive piece of legislation. It's a thorough and comprehensive plan. It's 340 pages in total, touches every part of this industry. So we are laser focused on the next steps to get this through the committee process in the House and the Senate, eventually get it to the floor, have a collaborative process, Democrats and Republicans, House and Senate working together, get it to the president's desk, and then we'll figure out, what is next and what we should do in this industry. But it would be a big win. I mean, this is really a significant national security issue for us, but it's also going to create jobs. It's going to lower costs, and it's also an urgent response to the threat that China poses over the oceans. And I'll tell you what, if we cannot keep pace with, China's shipbuilding and their fleet, it ultimately could drive up costs and it could threaten our national security.
Well, I just want to thank you for taking the time to be with us today. And especially, I want to thank you for your leadership as a merchant mariner. It is great to have a merchant mariner in the U.S. Congress. You take that seat from Senator McCain, and he's a great advocate for sea power in the past. And I got to say, I'm just really just full of respect for what you're doing, for taking this on, you and Senator Young and everybody who was involved. It's not just you two, but it was a big group. And most importantly, it was bipartisan across the country. I think this is one thing, watching hearings on this in Congress, it's amazing how both sides, Republican and Democrat, are on focus with this issue. And I really appreciate you taking the time, and more importantly, being a leader in really pushing this home. So thank you for being with us today, sir.
Thank you, Sal. I take this industry very seriously. I really care about it. I have my 2 licenses, my 3rd assistant engineer's license and my 3rd mate's license, hanging on the wall right over there in my Senate office.
That says it all. We appreciate it, sir.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Mike Roberts. I'm a senior fellow at the Hudson Institute. I want to thank all of you who have supported our work on maritime and defense issues. Work relevant to today's discussion can be found under the American Maritime Security Initiative Policy Center at hudson.org. Before turning to our distinguished guests, I want to take just a minute for background. I spent decades in the maritime industry helping shape the policies that govern U.S. shipping today. And a few years ago, I came to a sobering realization. We got it wrong. We thought we had the right balance, maintain competition under American laws in our home markets while embracing wide open competition in global markets. We put the interests of American consumers above all else, and that meant giving them the cheapest ships and shipping services. We knew that companies with American costs couldn't possibly match prices with companies that scour the globe for the cheapest labor and other costs and that get massive subsidies from their governments. We didn't care. Security wasn't an issue. The Soviet Union was defeated, and China was still an impoverished country and had just 5% of the shipbuilding market. Fast forward to today, China, our geopolitical rival, now has at least 75% of that market. It delivers 3 ships to the Chinese Navy for every 1 ship delivered to the US Navy. More than any other country, China controls the maritime supply chains that feed our economy. All of this threatens our national security and our economic resilience. Thanks to the leadership of Senators Kelly, Young, and key House members, we now have a smart, comprehensive bill announced just this morning that can restore American strength in shipping and shipbuilding. And with us today are 2 leaders who have been driving this effort. Senator Mark Kelly of Arizona, an astronaut, Navy fighter pilot, and graduate of the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, and Senator Todd Young of Indiana, a Naval Academy graduate, Marine Corps veteran, and a key voice on commerce and finance issues. It's an honor to have you here today, and thank you for your service. Thank you. Moderating today's conversation is my colleague Brian Clark, Senior Fellow and Director at Hudson's Center for Defense Concepts and Technology. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you, Mike, and thank you, Senators, for being here. It's funny that we've got 2 Navy Academy graduates, 3 Navy people, but no surface warfare officers here. So we're going to talk about the surface fleet. But thank you very much for being here. So this morning, we released the Ships for America Act back into the mix so that we could look at it as part of the legislative calendar for this year. So how does this fit in with the other activities we've seen on the maritime industry over the last month? The executive order that came out from the White House. There's a reconciliation bill that's now been introduced on the House side. How do these fit together, and why is it important for us to pursue the Ships for America Act now?
Well, let me start, Brian. Thank you. Michael, thank you for the opportunity to come here today. It's great for Todd and I to get out here, especially today, and talk about this legislation. It's really important to our national security. I think when the trade representative identified that we've got this problem, and obviously we've known about this problem for a long time. It's a problem that has existed all the way back to when I was a freshman, plebe, at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, and before that. Back then we had 400 or 500 ocean-going merchant ships in U.S. trade. That number definitely went down to about 400 when I was in the first Gulf War. Today it's 80. China has 5,500, and their shipbuilding capacity just dwarfs. I mean, it's just huge compared to what we have. So our original House co-sponsor on this legislation was Mike Waltz, who just happened to become the National Security Advisor, which is rather helpful. So he highlighted this issue for the President, for the White House, and then the President did some executive actions which says, hey, there's a problem, and we need to come up with some solutions to try to solve this problem. The executive action doesn't have a lot of the solutions in it. Some of the stuff in the EO came from our bill, but the solution to the problem is actually to get this legislation passed.
Yeah. So you're going?
Well, thank you so much to Hudson for this opportunity. And, I have to say that Mark Kelly has just done an exceptional job on this. He diagnosed a problem along with Mike Waltz. I came in when it was clear Mike Waltz was going to be tapping out for other responsibilities, and the legislation has evolved a bit since that period of time, and I think we're broadening our constituency of support, and we have laborers, we have industry, we've got the national security community, and bipartisan support from different branches of government. It's rare that you have an issue in which there's such a convergence of views, and it is in part because the difference between our preparedness for a major long time frame conflict and that of other adversary countries as you begin to think about conflicts that could last into the many months, even the years. It required pretty disciplined and focused action. And so that's what we propose here. It's going to take some time to reconstitute our ability to train the mariners, to manufacture the ships and increase our capacities. But I think that the president's objectives and our objectives harmonize very closely when it comes to this. I agree with what Mark said. We offer more specific solutions here. And so I would characterize our efforts as complementary in nature. And then there's some things that will have to happen outside of the scope of this legislation. On the military front, that's happening at the same time. Perhaps we get a bit into that. And then probably on an ongoing basis, we're going to have to optimize our workforce development system so that we have the requisite supply of workers.
Yeah, and so we'll dig into a few of those topics. So, first of all, you had mentioned, Senator Kelly, just where we stand relative to China. I mean, China's got this shipbuilding industry that dwarfs ours by hundreds of times in terms of the numbers of ships they pump out per year. And the U.S. is not probably going to be able to match what China does from an industrial standpoint. But why is it important for us to get a shipbuilding industry going at some scale beyond where it is today? And how would that help address some of the challenges you might face against China, either in competition or conflict?
I'd say one of the things our military is really good at is contested logistics. And we have the Military Sealift Command. We've got a transportation command that is phenomenal. You saw this especially during the first Gulf War, 1991, getting all that combat power to the other side of the planet very quickly, staging it, ready. In that case, against Iraq, we were not facing a near-peer adversary. If we were in a conflict with China, they are a significant threat, especially when you consider we have to go across the 5,000-mile ocean, and there, if the conflict's over Taiwan, 100 miles off their shore. And I think we would do well in the first days of any conflict with China. What I worry about is, what does the second and third month look like? Right. What does year 2 look like if it's a protracted conflict? And they've got a significant submarine force. They've got the ability to project power out hundreds and hundreds of miles out into the Pacific. And if history is any indicator, a naval conflict, naval air conflict like that, you'd wind up with a lot of that capacity at the bottom of the ocean. Right. And we don't have a lot of reserves to turn to. We've got 80 ocean-going U.S. flag merchant ships. Right. And if you consider what happened to our supply chains just from COVID in 2021, 2022 timeframe, that had a significant impact on our economy. If conflict with China would be much, much worse than that. Right. So we've got to be able to get stuff, we've got to be able to move stuff around. And what I really worry about, even beyond just conflict with China, is them just deciding, one day they're not going to support our economy anymore, just to send a message, or maybe that becomes the opening of their move to repatriate Taiwan.
Right, right. And that kind of supply chain warfare, something we're very vulnerable to, considering the size of the U.S. flag fleet compared to the ships under Chinese flag, or the ships under Chinese control, or the Chinese, the ships that are, or the fleets that are using Chinese-built ships, all of which could be leveraged against us. Senator Young, one of the things that the bill does is create this strategic commercial fleet to try to put more ships under U.S. flag and maximize or increase by 3 times the number of ships that we've got operating under U.S. carriers. Do you think that'll help to address that? And what are some of the other benefits of having this much larger U.S. flag fleet that you think the bill helps to promote?
Well, I do think that the strategic commercial fleet, its growth for the next decade or so will help us fill that gap. And that's how I would characterize it, fill a gap until we really have the capacity to build on an ongoing basis a lot more of our own ships, right? We're going to have to work with other countries and their foreign-built vessels, sign them up, put them on retainer, so to speak, to move our material, our personnel, when necessary, into harm's way. And as compensation for that, the structure is, of course, they'll receive the first right of refusal to move cargo, and so there are benefits to membership as well. So that's how we propose to get over that hump. And as with so many, you mentioned economic coercion.
Right.
This is at once, it's a national security effort, the Ships for America Act, but it's also designed, as was our semiconductor initiative, that Mark was helpful in as well. It's designed to take risk out of our supply chain. Keep working with friends and allies. That's part of economic resiliency and economic security, but take enough risk out so that we can't be on the receiving end of coercive activity, so we can continue to grow our economy, enjoy our way of life. There's coercion that happens on a daily basis. This is part of China's model now, and much of it goes unseen by the American people. There are many things we don't do and we would otherwise do on account of the threat of being starved of critical inputs, whether it's ships or critical minerals.
Right. That's a really good point. And that's something that, like you mentioned, Senator Kelly, in peacetime, it could be even a prelude to conflict or an alternative if you're China and looking to pressure the United States and staying out of a conflict or confrontation over Taiwan. So Senator Kelly, one of the, Senator Young mentioned the idea of the CHIPS Act and how the CHIPS Act was sort of designed to promote supply chain resiliency and has a bunch of knock-on effects in terms of promoting other industries that support the chip making industry. So for shipbuilding, a bunch of other ancillary industries are involved as well. So, and I think the bill gets at a lot of support to a lot of those other industries as well. So the people that do metal fabrication, the tradespeople that are involved there, the mariners that operate the ships, all of which are important to our military needs. So do you see that as being an essential dimension of the CHIPS Act? Is this kind of lifting up of the commercial support to the naval force?
It's like the entire ecosystem. You see this table here has got 3 legs on it. I think of this legislation as a 3-legged stool, and it needs every one of those or this thing will tip over. One of those legs is the shipbuilding. Right. Having the infrastructure. I was recently up at the Philly Navy shipyard, now owned by a South Korean company. They look at this as an opportunity for them to expand. They've already invested, hundreds, I think about $100 million in that shipyard. They can invest a lot more, build more ships, double. Actually, I think they said, Joe, correct me if I'm wrong, but capacity up to maybe 10 ships in a year. It's a possibility for that. Right. For that shipyard, they do 2, I think, right now. To get that shipbuilding capacity, they're going to need some tax credits. There's going to be some infrastructure improvement required, research and development. The other leg is the shipping itself, having U.S. flagged, once these ships are built, that they're U.S. flagged with U.S. crews. So you need incentives to get people to go into the maritime industry, to take on a career where you're going to sea, and then the retention of those individuals. But also the shipping companies are going to need incentives to flag the U.S. ships. Todd talked about that, how that cargo preference could work or will once we get the legislation passed. And then the final leg of that stool is the entire workforce. You mentioned these suppliers. So I went to the Merchant Marine Academy with a woman named Jennifer Boykin. When she was there, she was Jen Roman. She was the president of Newport News Naval Shipbuilding. Her biggest issue in cranking out aircraft carriers and submarines is workforce. Right. Having the people who can, weld the holes together and install valves and pumps and all that machinery is a real problem, finding the workforce. And then after that, it's having all the supply chain available. How many companies in the United States build valves that are certified for Navy ships? You just can't go to any old company and buy a valve that's going to go into a Virginia-class submarine. So by getting this legislation passed and building the commercial maritime industry, it has this ancillary benefit of supporting our naval shipbuilding. which, as you mentioned, the Chinese, I would say our quality is still better.
Yeah.
Certainly in aircraft carriers and submarines, but the quantity, has a qualitative effect all on its own.
Right, right, absolutely. And so Senator Young, in the reconciliation bill, there's a lot of money going toward naval shipbuilding. So investing in more ships, putting money into shipyards, putting money into workforce development on the naval side. Do you think there'll be opportunities for some of that to maybe benefit the commercial side as well? Because I think there's probably commonalities in the supply chain. There's obviously commonalities in workforce. Are there ways to take advantage of this kind of dual track of investment, if you will, between the SHIPS Act and what's going on with reconciliation?
It's not coincidental that we're introducing this legislation at the very time that Chairman Wicker, Ranking Member Reed are intently focused on rebuilding the United States Navy, right? Because these are complementary investments. They're not synonymous, right? But the way we're thinking about our first step is first rebuild the commercial shipbuilding capacity as Chairman Wicker and Senator Reed build the Navy, and then our workforce training initiatives, our shipyard initiatives, and all the other facets of this multifaceted legislation can be optimized over time and integrated with DoD's efforts. And so who's going to do that work, that fine-tuning across government walls? Well, I mean, we also bake that into this structure by establishing a National Maritime Office in the White House. Because this initiative spans from Department of Labor to education, to DoD, to commerce, to transportation, and on. So it's essential that from the beginning we have somebody coming up with strategic plans to review and optimize. But first we have to get started, right?
Right. That makes sense. So, Senator Kelly, we talked about workforce a couple of times here. And it seems like that's going to be a big challenge. It's already a challenge in the shipbuilding industry that we have now that's focused mostly on naval shipbuilding. And it's even a problem in the mariner workforce where if you talk to Maritime Seal Command, they're short thousands of mariners and they're having to lay up ships because they don't have enough mariners to staff them. So how does the SHIPS Act start to promote more people going into the maritime industry as a career choice? Is it just by creating a demand signal, or there's other incentives?
Well, first we've got to make people aware that these are great paying careers, and it could span an entire career. Jobs that in some cases require a 4-year education, whether at the U.S. Merchant Marine Academy or one of the state schools. Mike Fossum here in the front row is the head of the Texas A&M Maritime School in Galveston. We flew in space together twice, and not many people I've flown in space with 2 times. Mike's one of the few. And we need these schools to be, at full capacity. I've talked to Mike about this before. Attracting students that are willing to take on this career is a little bit of a challenge, but that's because you just need to educate people and tell them that these opportunities are there, and then the facilities have to be in good shape. The U.S. Merchant Marine Academy, where I went, Kings Point, New York, suffers some rather significant infrastructure problems. We're trying to address that. That's addressed in the bill, and the funding for the state schools is addressed in the bill, making sure they have the training ships they need. There are ships being built right now from previous defense bills. But we've got to have these, facilities operating at their full capacity. And then also for the unlicensed crew members, there are, seafarer schools. There's one in Piney Point, Maryland. There's others around the country that they need to have the resources to run really great programs. And then we have to have incentives for people to stay in the industry. And some of that is in the legislation as well.
Right. One of the things you had mentioned, Senator Young, is the role of allies in this effort to try to improve U.S. shipbuilding. So Hanwha recently invested in the Philly shipyard. Other foreign companies are looking to make investments in the U.S. There, obviously, some have already. Austal has a investor, obviously owns Austal USA. Marinette Marine is a subsidiary of Fincantieri. So how do we see our allies being able to contribute to this effort to revitalize the U.S. shipbuilding industry?
A number of our allies, South Koreans in particular, I've had several direct conversations with them, some with the Japanese. They have capital. They have capital looking for opportunities right now. They see opportunities here because of their core competencies in shipbuilding. And we have a model from the CHIPS Act in which this sort of partnership has occurred. So we need to build on that success. We need to invite in, after the capital is deployed and these shared investments are made, we need to invite in expertise so we can relearn certain skill sets, right? And then this is going to be a value proposition, not just in terms of the ROI for our foreign allies and the security benefits of a closer partnership, but also the technological. I mean, we have advances. We have things to bring to bear. We have our tech community, which can bring their expertise, their creativity to some of these processes and activities as well. And so the Koreans in particular are excited about that, about modernizing their own operations as they locate here. But first we got to get started, right? And so before I sound too dreamy, we've got to get started. We've got to pass this legislation. But the president buys into the vision I just articulated. As much Sturm und Drang as we have had recently as it relates to some of our trade partnerships, he is looking to build partnerships in some of these areas. This is one of those areas.
I think Australia is a good example.
Yeah.
Right, so you mentioned Austal,
right,
who built the Freedom class LCS ships, built 10 of them. One has my wife's name. USS Gabrielle Giffords on the back, LCS
cool.
10. They did a great job with that ship. I mean, there's a lot of controversy about that platform, especially from my predecessor, Senator John McCain. But the Freedom class especially, or the Independence class, is doing really well. But then there's the AUKUS program. Right now, we've got Australian naval officers on Virginia-class subs, on patrol, learning how to operate a nuclear sub. They've gone through new power school, and then Australia will be, at some point here in the future, building Virginia-class attack subs, which is critical to the fight in the Western Pacific. It's one area where I would say more than anything else, we still maintain a significant overmatch over the Chinese. So we got to take advantage of it. We got to expand it. But that's I think a good example of where this is going with one partner. But that can be true with other allies as well.
Right.
One of the things, if I could circle back to some of our workforce challenges or opportunities, and I think there are a lot of opportunities here. It may be a bit incongruous for some folks at home thinking, United States Senator from Arizona, mostly landlocked state last time I checked, right? Yeah.
With zero water.
That's right, yeah. And Indiana, riverine, we have a little dip of Lake Michigan, so that makes us full-fledged maritime in my view, right? But with that said, there are massive untapped opportunities to mobilize a workforce that, despite maybe some economic analysis, is not driven primarily by economic considerations. Young people want to do important things. They want to be called on to serve a cause greater than themselves, to be part of solving generational and multi-generational challenges, and here we are. We're creating opportunities to design, to manufacture components across the country. And no, it doesn't take a degree in naval architecture from a top 20 university. You can go to your local community college conceivably and enroll in a program, right? To realize your dreams, to be part of the American dream here. So we're trying to unlock that. We think about the back home value proposition for this. It's about economic security, it's about national security, but it's also about becoming a better and more resilient version of ourselves and giving regular people an opportunity to participate in this project.
And I think that's a really good point, is the idea that if you invest in the shipbuilding industry, that's going to promote the whole supply chain that goes behind them back into multiple tiers that are elsewhere in the country, away from the coast.
Yeah, I think Todd also made a good point. You got to really trust us on this,
Yeah.
because our states don't really have any, any dog in this fight here. I had a reporter ask me, so what's the connection to Arizona? And I said, nothing. And he said, no, really, there's got to be something, like some company or something. It's like, no, there's no connection.
I mean, that wasn't our motivating factor.
Right.
I wasn't motivated, despite maybe some perspectives back home, to do the Chips and Science Act so I could get a packaging fab in West Lafayette, Indiana. I mean, frankly, that wasn't even on my radar at the time. It was economic security, it was national security, but there were benefits to be found.
Right.
And here again, we've been led into this effort in industrial policy by pure motives, and I do think there will be opportunities. You don't know what they are yet. Perhaps it's certain semiconductors that are mostly, I say with chagrin, made in his state, not mine, but that will go in there. In my own state, I've already discovered some value propositions. We have Rolls-Royce. They make maritime engines.
Yeah.
We have Cummins.
Yeah.
We have all sorts of auto manufacturing, supply chain, small businesses that are looking at perhaps machining certain parts. So if we're smart, and I think this White House is looking for spare capacity so that we can meet demand, then there's going to be broadly distributed opportunity associated with this effort.
And some of the technologies or approaches that our allies bring to bear use the modular shipbuilding. In Italy, Fincantieri
Sort of
does
the
a lot of that.
Liberty ship model from generations
Building
ago,
them
right?
inland and bringing the parts out to the coast. And so I think Austal does some of that today.
Yeah, they do.
So that certainly could promote a much broader industrial base for the maritime industry.
Yeah.
One of the things that the bill uses, which I thought was really interesting, are basically market-based approaches to try to promote U.S. shipbuilding, promote carriers to go under U.S. flag, and as opposed to just straight subsidies. It's a competitive bid process, and you incentivize people to try to offer the lowest bid possible to get those subsidies. Was that part of the motivation or part of the idea, was that you're trying to create like a market-based demand signal? So this is like a demand-based tool for promoting shipbuilding rather than just pumping a bunch of money into the industry?
Well, we've got a $37 trillion debt and running a $2 trillion deficit every year, and we've got to figure out that problem. So, my view, it's better to have something that's much better to have something that's fully paid for, paid for by incentives within the industry and a tax structure that'll work, so you don't have to go back to the American taxpayer and say, fund this thing.
Right.
That it's integral to the legislation.
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point, because the subsidies that are provided are funded by the trust fund, which is getting money from the fees and duties that are paid by shippers as they use the U.S.
I think it helps get the thing, passed too. Eventually, we'll get a score from the GAO on this, but the idea was to have it paid for within the legislation.
So, Senator Young, one of the things that's one of the elements in the bill, which I think is really important, also thinking about Indiana, though, is intermodal transportation and pier infrastructure and basically all the stuff that gets the material off the ship and into the heartland of the country. Does the bill start to try to address some of that transshipment or some of that intermodal transportation infrastructure that I think has been probably lacking investment for a long time?
Well, we do. One way in which we address this is, again, through the National Maritime Office in the White House, so that they can have an integrated view of different modes of transportation and how they can plug into one another and harmonize. Another thing we have done, and I think it's much needed and long delayed, is establishment of a maritime trust fund. We have this in the surface transportation area, right? A highway trust fund. It hasn't always been well funded over the years, but in this case, we take existing revenue streams from use of our assets, our ports and other maritime assets, put those into a trust fund and dedicate them towards the funding of various initiatives in this bill. So that too is supportive of the broader intermodal effort, and it's fiscally responsible.
Right, right. And so so your vision for this is to get the bill across the finish line this year and start the provisioning of or the incentivization of folks to start putting ships under U.S. flag right away. Some of the things that we've heard recently in terms of U.S. shipping vulnerabilities are LNG tankers. I guess one thing that industry is challenged by is a lack of capacity that's not Chinese built or Chinese controlled.
Yeah, we don't build any here.
Right, and so do you think that we'll start to see some kind of immediate benefits in terms of the resiliency of our shipping fleet and our ability to overcome some of the supply chain disruptions China might want to impose?
Yeah, I mean, that's the ultimate goal. 250 ships, ocean going, U.S. flagged in 10 years, just for a start. And I know that's not 5,500 like the Chinese have, but it's a hell of a lot better than 80.
Right.
And that could include LNG ships. I know the Speaker of the House is rather interested, coming from Louisiana, and the opportunities that we have there about with a LNG port that he's interested in having built. It would be beneficial to our national security to be able to move liquefied gas around.
So, Senator Young,
Believe it or not, we're making some vessels that they don't move LNG. They're smaller at Corn Island Shipyard in Lamar, Indiana, on the Ohio River. And Don Fursh, if you're watching, he's probably not, but there may be an opportunity for him. Years ago, he mentioned this to me. He said, I've thought maybe someday, he said, maybe I'm dreaming, I've thought about maybe building LNG vessels right here on the Ohio. Huh?
Is he the CEO of the company?
Yeah, oh yeah, yeah, Don Fursh. His grandson is a Naval Academy grad, so sea power is in his blood, right? But I mean, that's just an illustration. If you can create this market signal, the doers and dreamers start to, they start to get organized.
Right, right. I think what we would probably see I guess one thing is getting the ability to be reliably able to move troops and material also overseas in the event of a confrontation with China. I think that's one thing that you had mentioned at the beginning, Senator Kelly.
Yeah, we're not going to get control of a Chinese ship, even if that ship is coming to and from the United States. But U.S. flagships, the United States government has the right to take control in time of war and use those commercial ships for whatever purpose we need for our own national defense.
Right, right.
I think many of us have been deluded over the years because of some of the public commentary and dreamy thinking about a revolution in military affairs, which in some ways has been real. But we've been lulled into thinking that most conflicts would be short and tidy. And I think many of our military planners have perpetuated that view, right? And it's great if we can finish our conflicts like Gulf War I, right? But when we start to move into a several months or several year long effort, which is what modern history shows is quite common, right? Are we prepared? Clearly we're not. I mean, look at Ukraine and our military industrial base. So shame on us if we don't make the requisite changes now.
And I think historically, any conflict that lasts more than a year tends to last many years. If they're not short, they tend to be very long.
Right.
I also think it's important to recognize that and I know right now we're trying to retool, reposition our forces for conflict in the Western Pacific. And part of what this is about, it's about our economy. It's also about our national security.
Right, right.
It's a combination of those two things. But as we, constantly make changes to our Department of Defense and what our national strategy is going to be on defense, I also think it's important to recognize that usually the war we plan for is not the one we wind up getting in.
Right.
So we got to be aware of that too. We got to be kind of flexible here.
Right. Well, I mean, it brings up the point. The Pentagon's moving towards this idea of a lot of small attritable, uncrewed systems we're going to use to be able to stop Chinese aggression, to attack targets downrange, and those things have to get over there somehow. If we're going to, once we use the initial supply that's in theater, you have to come up with a way to ship the rest of them into theater as the fight continues.
It's totally a different topic, but this, idea of drone warfare that we see over land between Russia and Ukraine, it assumes that you have some control over the electronic warfare environment. Not necessarily going to be true, here in the future. This push to go to more unmanned systems, I think it's a little bit premature. That's why I've been a big proponent of NGAD. I think we need at least one more fighter, because when things go to shit, it's the guy in the cockpit that can still get to the target, get the bombs on the target. It's not really true necessarily for unmanned systems right now.
Right. We could talk later about FAXX, where the Navy.
Yeah, that too.
I just want to make a point. I've lost track of time here, but we've talked a lot about military power. There's been some reference by both of us to economic coercion and economic security, but I just want to underscore the fact we are a trading nation. We've been a trading nation, and therefore emphasize the importance of having a Navy to defend our sea lines of trade and communication for generations, going back to the 1790s, right? And it was pretty early in our history, from the War of 1812 to the Barbary pirates and the harassment. It became clear we need a robust merchant marine and a United States Navy to defend our way of life, to grow our economy, et cetera. And we're incredibly vulnerable right now if we don't bolster that capacity. This is not just about, God forbid, military conflict, a major military and longstanding military conflict. This is about day-to-day trading and not having to ask Mother May I in order to bring goods here and send them there, right?
Well, and just as we close this out, Senator Kelly, I think if you don't have a strong maritime industry, though, in wartime, you don't have something to fall back on to build that next tranche of ships that are going to replace the ones that you lose in the initial confrontation, like we saw in World War II. So it seems like there's definitely a need to create this industry or to revitalize an industry that we're going to depend on. We've sort of gotten into kind of in the mode of, well, we only need the ships we're building right now as opposed to the ones we might build in the future once the fight starts.
Yeah, we went through this before, before World War II with Liberty ships, and we had a program to rapidly, build ships for that conflict. Yeah, I think our geography is kind of a double-edged sword. We have got oceans on both sides, which has been great for some, from one perspective. On the other perspective, it also makes us vulnerable to getting stuff here if we are facing adversaries that could interfere with shipping lanes and shipping capacity. And then on top of it, if we do strengthen this industry, the commercial maritime industry with the workforce and the shipbuilding and the flagging of U.S. ships, it will help our naval shipbuilding, without a doubt. I don't look at it, some people have said, well, it's going to compete. If we have a bigger maritime industry, it can lift up places like Newport News and Electric Boat and other folks that build naval ships. And that's the ultimate goal here, is to make our economy more resilient, to our major adversaries, and to have just the national security capacity we need.
Absolutely. Well, I think that's a good place to end it. Thank you very much, Senator Mark Kelly from Arizona, Senator Todd Young from Indiana.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.
Well, I hope you enjoyed today's episode. It's a lot. It's a big episode, I know, but I can't thank Senator Kelly enough for giving me the time to come on the show. He was very gracious, very nice to come on. I get blamed a lot for being one political side or another. I'll invite Senator Young on also. I am not partisan at all. Senator Kelly, the only merchant mariner in Congress, he's the logical one for me to talk to, and so I did. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you did, hey, take a moment, subscribe to the channel, and hit the bell so be alerted about new videos as they come on. Leave a comment, share it across social media, and if you can, support the page. How do you do that? You hit the super thanks button down below or head on over to Patreon and become a monthly, yearly subscriber. Until our next episode or our next interview between two Sterns. I don't think I'm going to be able to top Senator Kelly, but I do have some great interviews coming up here shortly. Until next episode, Sal, signing off.